For joining us today. My name is Jill Schrader, and I'm helping manage the grant program for the Western IPM Center this year. And as you probably just heard, we are recording this session just so that we've got it in the archive in case anybody needs to view it later. But as I say, welcome to this discussion. I am going to run through a few of the key aspects of the request for proposals for this year, and then we'll open it up for questions and any questions that you might have. So to start with, what I want to emphasize is that applications are due by 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on Friday, December 8th of this year. We recommend to everyone that you start early with your application process. In the past, there have been a few instances where we've lost power or had some issues with the application site on the final day of the due date of the applications. And so we sure don't want you to have any problems with getting your application uploaded and finished in the portal by the application deadline. So for that reason alone, please start early and get your applications in. And of course, if you have any problems, please contact us and we'll do what we can to help you out. We have some very good IT people who have been very responsive to us. The next slide is this is and the next important thing is if you haven't found the RFA, you can find links to it in the Western IPM Center October or November newsletters, or you can go directly to the Western IPM site. There's a link to the RFA on the welcome page, and there's also links under the grant proposal situation. So what I recommend is that you read this RFA very carefully, ask any questions after you've read it, and to make sure that you understand everything. And please follow all of the instructions so that you're going to provide all the requested information at the depth that you want to include in your proposal. So again, if you start early and if you are very familiar with the RFA, you should have no trouble with providing all the information we request. There's some important items that we're going to be walking through here today. First of all, in your application, there's going to be a request for you to identify the center regional priorities that your application addresses. We're going to ask you to identify your stakeholder priorities and also identify who your stakeholders are and how you're engaging with them. To walk through that a little bit, the center priorities are overall, in general, the center is looking to develop IPM tools to address invasive, resistant, or emerging pest problems in the Western United States. There's several regional priorities that stakeholders
just need to mute it real quick. Okay.
Could you please,
yeah, well,
could you please
kind
mute
of like
your
whatever
line?
you need to do.
Excuse me,
Of
Molly?
course.
Molly, would you mute? Molly?
I just want you to know that like everything that you outlined to me before sounded good. I didn't feel like I was overburdened in any way, and I was looking forward to the, collaboration process. But if you
Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that, Jill. Took me a minute.
Sure, no problem. Thank you. Please, everybody, make sure that your lines are muted while we're talking here. The regional priorities are very important to consider. They're listed on page 2 of the RFA, and they're not listed in any particular order of significance, but they do discuss the key issues that stakeholder groups across the West have identified as important. To please make note as well, we've seen this in the past, but in the application form, it asks you to list the center priorities, no more than 3 priorities that your proposal is going to address. But we also ask you in the proposal narrative in more than one place to, again, reference the center priorities, regional priorities that your proposal addresses, and how you intend to address those. It's important to really keep these in mind as you're developing your proposal. The second area of priorities that you need to be considering and identifying within your proposal are your stakeholder priorities. And there are several ways, several places that you can go to help develop your proposal in terms of documenting your stakeholder priorities. There's a number, they're all listed on this slide, either the pest management strategic plans, recommendations from Western groups, reports from your stakeholder groups, and as well as letters of support from your stakeholders. This is one place that you can go in the on the Western IPM website to look for the pest management strategic plans and crop profiles. These can provide you some very good background data to help document the needs of stakeholders that you're trying to address with your project. The third thing that we would like you to identify within your proposal is within the stakeholder, in the proposal narrative, we ask you to identify who your audience is and who your stakeholders are. Then a documentation for who your stakeholders are and their engagement can be done through letters of support from your key stakeholders. And so that's something else to pay attention to and make sure that you've documented within your proposal. There's 3 grant types that you can apply for or develop a proposal under. There's a maximum of $40,000 that you can ask for budget for each proposal if you want to do more than one proposal, but a proposal cannot ask for more than $40,000. There's 3 grant types. There's a project initiation grants, IPM work group grants, or outreach and implementation grants. And these are 1-year grant proposals, 1-year grants. And so you need to make sure that you can consider your timeline as you're developing your proposal. Another thing that you need to be noting is that all of the proposals that we receive are going to be reviewed together. There's not a specific pool of money for each grant type, but the reviewers are asked to evaluate all of the grant types together and identify the best proposals among all of those that we've received. One of the things that we like to try to show in this presentation is how the different categories fit into the overall scope of the NIFA grant programs. The center is funded through the National Institute for Food and Agriculture. And as you can see here in this graph, there's a number of very large grants that NIFA offers that you can be applying to. The grants that are offered through the Western IPM Center are $40,000. This particular RFA has a maximum of $40,000 that you can apply for. The work groups can be considered in 2 different categories. They can, from across the region, you can bring together a group of people to discuss a particular issue and work together to develop projects or approaches to IPM of that particular pest. Can also be, work groups can be formed to implement or to look at how can you implement information that's been gathered in other areas. Project initiation grants are usually like an early proof of concept type grant or a grant proof of concept type proposal, or a project to develop data that can then be used to perhaps provide preliminary data for one of these other NIFA grants. Outreach and implementation, generally the work is done and you have the information that you need, but what you need to do is develop a program to bring that information to your stakeholder groups more effectively. So there's 3 different types of grants. The maximum amount available for each grant proposal is $40,000. One of the things that's very important to the grant program here at the Western IPM Center is regionality. Proposals, the program seeks to support collaboration among states, islands, territories, and First Nations. So it needs to have, your project needs to have participants from multiple states, or clearly demonstrate how your project is going to have a regional benefit going forward. The only exceptions to this are allowed when the project director can document that the host pest combination occurs only in one state. So this regionality of the proposal is very, very important to being competitive in this program. I'd like to take a few minutes and just walk through the proposal score sheet. And the proposal score sheet is outlined on page 5 of the RFA. And this score sheet is what the reviewers are going to use to find the scoring criteria for each proposal type and use this information to guide their reviews of your proposal. One thing that's very important to keep in mind is that the reviewers may not be from the Western region. So it's really important to provide a clear and thorough description of the pests that you're dealing with the problem that you have encountered, how you propose to address the problem, and how the outcomes might address the regional priorities and programs as well as your objectives. Again, they may not know they may not know the specifics about some of the problems that we deal with in the West. And so clear, concise descriptions and explanations of the pest, why is it a pest, where is it a pest, how is it important to the Western region, is very important for the reviewers to be able to accurately review your proposal. The first thing that the reviewers are going to be looking at is whether or not you've provided all the information that's requested, all the forms that have been requested, if you've met all the format requirements that are outlined in the RFA, and whether the proposal is complete. So this is easy points and can be very important to making your proposal a competitive proposal, because there's we hope that there will be a lot of submissions, and so if you have this 10 points, it can go very far in making your proposal competitive. The problem and justification is very important to spend some time on as you're going through and developing your proposal. You need to make sure that you include the project type. Is it a project initiation, work group, or outreach and implementation grant? You need to discuss the center priorities, the regional priorities that your program is going to address, and why your project is going to be important for integrated pest management in the Western region. You need to identify who your stakeholders are and talk about how you're going to address their priorities. And you also need to think about regional collaboration and how you're going to address that regionality of the Western priorities. So keep in mind that this is a one-year project. You need to think about about the fact that this is a single year. How does this project integrate into your overall IPM objectives as well as the center priorities? Because a one-year grant isn't going to solve all your IPM problems. And so thinking about how this integrates and how this fits into the broader scope of your program and your IPM approaches can be really important to making your proposal competitive. The next area on the score sheet that the reviewers are going to be looking at is the potential for success of your project. The criteria that they're going to use to evaluate this section is going to vary by your project category, whether it's project initiation, work group, or outreach and implementation. But what they're going to be looking for is whether you've got clear objectives that outline a logical solution to the problem that you've presented in your justification statement. They're going to look at whether or not your procedures or your plans for your proposal or for your project are linked to these objectives and how likely they are to address the problem that you've identified. They're going to look at these procedures and try and determine whether or not you can complete this project in a 1-year period of time. And they're going to look to see whether or not what you propose to do is going to address the problem that you've identified. One of the things that some proposals have done very successfully to help document this is to include a timeline that tells the reviewer, tells whoever's reading the proposal, what are your milestones for completion of the project. And so it can help them evaluate whether or not you have the potential for completing it in a timely manner. The next area is an area that been identified by the Western region as important, because there's many underserved stakeholders that the center has been working hard to fully engage. And these are stakeholders that have not typically been engaged in IPM with the Western IPM Center. And so they're working hard to fully engage the broader audience of pest management needs within the Western region. And the 10-point score for this category reflects that goal that of working to address underserved stakeholders' needs. And this slide kind of outlines that what we're looking for. Does the project engage with and serve the needs of these underserved stakeholders? Is the project lead from one of these communities, or does the project involve members of this community? And will the project include groups not typically engaged with or not practicing IPM currently? One of the areas that many people miss in this category is whether they're an EPSCoR state, and I've got a little bit more on that in a following slide. A little bit more on the underserved stakeholders. Projects that are designed by or document that connection will be credited in this category. And the RFA on page 5 under this section lists some of the resources that are available to help you identify some of these communities, and so that you can use that to help you document whether or not you're working with an underserved community. One of the things that we have done this year is to develop a rubric for underserved stakeholder engagement. This rubric was designed to help you, the project directors, understand how the reviewers will assess this criteria, and also to help the reviewers to determine how they're going to assess this criteria and assign points for this category. And so this rubric is on page 6 in the RFA, so you can use that to help you determine how the reviewers are going to look at your proposal for this category. One thing that I also want to make sure to state in this area is the fact that even if you are not working with an underserved stakeholder community, it does not mean you won't have a competitive proposal. We've had many proposals that have been awarded funding, and they have had other communities that they're working with. And so just because you're working, the community that you're working with is important, and your proposal will not be graded down just because you are not working with an underserved stakeholder and community. I hope that makes sense to you. On the bottom here is a link to the NIFA site that identifies the states that are an EPSCoR designated state. And what these states are states that have typically not been funded as strongly by USDA programs. And so they generally are considered an underserved community in general. So that's something to also take note of as you're looking to put together your proposal information. The next section is the outputs and outcomes. This is another important section that the reviewers are going to be looking at. The outputs are what the project is going to produce. What your products are going to vary depending on the project type. For example, a project initiation grant proposal may have publications, different types of publications, or another grant proposal as being one of their products of their project. A working group might have a grant proposal, or they might have some outreach information that they've got across the region that is their product of their project. And so what your product is going to differ depending on the type of project that you've got. But what the reviewers are going to be looking for is whether or not these products are going to are addressing the objectives, and if they are targeted at the audiences that you have identified in your proposal narrative. The outcomes are, first of all, you've got your outputs that are your products, and then the outcomes is what do you expect will happen as a result of the outputs that are produced from your proposed work. So the outcomes are the changes that might be influenced by the outputs. For example, what you need to be documenting or talking about in this section is what's the potential impact of your project. And again, you need to link these outcomes back to your objectives and your justification. The reviewers are going to be looking at what's the problem that you've identified, what were your objectives, and your outcomes make sense based on those objectives and the justification for your proposal. One of the things that you can do, keeping in mind that these are one-year projects, one of the things that you might think about doing is collecting data that can document change in knowledge, behavior, or condition, or collecting baseline data to later evaluate those changes through other parts of your program. Again, these need to relate to the WIPM Center priorities, and they need to relate to what you're proposing to do. A lot of people use logic models to try to as a tool to help demonstrate the connection between these different project pieces. We do not require that you include a logic model in your proposal, but it's something that you might consider doing for yourself to help you make sure that you've really thought through what you're going to be doing in your project and how it's going to fit into your larger program. This is an example of a generic logic model that is available from NIFA. This generic model is a NIFA generated example. But what you are looking at here is a situation. These are basically the pieces that we're talking about, that we've been talking about up until now in terms of what we're looking for in your project proposal. The situation is basically your problem and justification, discussion of what your problem is and how you're justifying why you need to do the work that you're proposing to do. The inputs are who's going to be involved in the project and how are those individuals or how are those groups going to contribute to the project to make sure that it is done correctly or done accurately and has the outputs that you're looking for. The activities are a description of your objectives and your procedures plan. The outputs, again, are your products that are going to be the finished product from your project. And then the outcomes are basically these knowledge, actions, and conditions that you think that you are intending will happen as a result of the outputs of your proposed project. Knowledge is going to be things like changes in skills or information or methods that come out of the project. Actions are what stakeholders are, are things like what are stakeholders doing differently? Will they apply the knowledge or will they use the information that you've provided or produced? The conditions are the pest problems, long-term are the pest problems managed, and has the regional issue been addressed? Some of these obviously are short-term outcomes. Some of them are longer-term outcomes or longer-term goals for what will happen. as part of your IPM program as a result of this project. But these are important things to think about, and think about how you're going to document those changes as a result of the project that you're proposing. The next area that is going to be evaluated is the expertise and the participation in the project. Who is involved with the project? And what will they contribute? It's the inputs from the logic model that we were just talking about. How are the end users involved in this? So what the reviewers are going to be looking for is evidence that the proposal has the expertise, that the proposed project has the experts and the expertise needed to accomplish the goals of the project. The project director and any co-project directors need to provide a bio-sketch, and that has a 3-page minimum. And they also will need to provide conflict of interest lists, as well as current and pending projects lists in the forms that we are requesting under the application documents. One of the things that the reviewers will look for as well is whether the project involves end users and students as appropriate, and describes how stakeholders will be involved. One of the things that you'll need to think about is also, if you've got other collaborators that are not project directors or co-project directors, you'll need to describe those collaborators, include letters from those individuals that they've agreed to collaborate on the project. So you need to be able to document all the expertise that's going to be contributing to the project, so that the reviewers can get a good sense of whether or not you're going to be successful with the project. The next section that is scored is the budget. And there's a form that's provided in the application documents for the budget. And so you just need to fill in that form. But you also need to provide a budget narrative that justifies the budget items. What the reviewers are going to be looking for, again, in this section is the budget that you've proposed reasonable based on the objectives that and the procedures that you've described? And have you justified those fully and carefully in your proposal? There's also a section in the grant portal for supporting documents. One of the things that you can do sometimes to support the problem statement is to provide some background tables and figures. If you decide to do that, you need to make sure that those tables and figures are only those that are necessary and support what you're saying in your justification. You don't want to just provide a lot of different data that is not specific to a point that you're making in your justification statement. There's a section for providing letters of support, and those would be those letters from your collaborators, letters from your co-project directors, any letters of intent or statements of work from the individuals that are going to be active on the project. You also will want to include the stakeholder letters of support that document that you've got the stakeholder engagement that and that your audience knows what you're doing, and support the proposal that you're writing. If you're working on a work group renewal proposal, you need to include a progress report, and that progress report would go under the supporting documents section. Other things to keep in mind, I'm probably repeating myself a number of times, but can't say it too many times, to start early and to read the request for proposals carefully and follow all of the instructions. Think about the regionality. Make sure that you've addressed the regionality in your scope of your justification. Think about how this proposal fits into your long-term projects or your IPM program, and describe that. And then think about also how this proposal addresses the priorities of the Western IPM Center, the regional priorities of the Western IPM Center. How does the proposal address your stakeholder priorities, and have you documented engagement with stakeholders in your proposal? These are some of the general things to keep in mind. These are one-year proposals. They're certainly not going to solve all the IPM problems in your area, so you really need to think about how this is going to answer a question within your overall program and within the regional priorities. There's the RFA gives you the link to the grant submission site, and all of the proposals we ask them to be submitted electronically. And in order to get into the submission site, you need to register at the grants.ipmcenters.org, and then it will give you a login so that you can get in and start working on your proposal. There are some tutorials for this submission site. If you have any problems with that, these tutorials can be helpful, and these are listed there. This is the link for those tutorials. And then one of the other things that the grant program did, or the Western IPM Center did, was invited some successful grant writers into the speak at a IPM hour. It was episode number 27, and it was the Western IPM Center new grant applicant overview and Q&A, and it was 3 successful grant writers giving information on what they did to write a successful grant. And that can be found on the Western IPM Center under the About the Center publications, and looking under the IPM hour, look for episode 27. Finally, I think, forms are available to download for your administrative section. What you need to do is complete each of these forms in full and upload as PDF files. And generally, your administrators will be responsible for getting these forms finished, and they need to be signed by the designated authorized organizational representative for your organization. You're also going to need to download a form for the conflict of interest for the project directors and co-project directors, as well as current and pending support forms, and fill those out for the project director and co-project director. All of those need to be saved as PDF files and uploaded into the application, into the system as you're developing your application. The project narrative is different. Please do not upload PDFs. All the information for the narrative will be filled into form fields directly or by cut and paste. So each of these sections that we've talked about this afternoon are separate sections within that project narrative. And so you need to cut and paste your information for each section into the appropriate form field. Finally, one more time, applications are due Friday, December 8th, 2023 by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Pacific Standard Time. And that's all I've got, and I can open it up for questions if anybody's got some.
Hey, Jill, we did have one question in the chat, and
Okay.
the person was asking about the availability of the recording of the webinar. Since we're recording the webinar, we will have that recording available next week. I'm not really 100% sure exactly how we're going to do it, but if you want that available to you, what we can do is you can just send us an email. Jill's email is posted in the RFA. Mine is posted on the website, and we can send you a link. It'll probably be posted on YouTube is the way I'm thinking we will probably distribute that.
Yeah, and I will be sharing the PDF of the slide deck with and we can put that on the website as well. Is that correct, Matt?
Correct. Yeah, we'll do that. So you can either pose your question. Oh, let's see. Can you see the chat, Jill? There's a second question
Yeah.
in the chat.
It says, if the work group includes a student, wait, I just lost it. The work group includes a student, could that person also apply for an IPM student fellowship? I don't see any reason why they couldn't, Matt. That would be an administrative question for you.
I agree with you 100%. They could certainly apply for both.
Okay. Chris, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just curious about how many applications you receive each year.
It's varied. I've been involved, this is my third, fourth year, Matt. I think we've had anywhere from 15, 16, all the way to 40 some applications. So it's varied from year to year. It's pretty hard to predict.
And just to add to that, usually our success rate is somewhere north of about 25%. So about a quarter of the proposals get funded.
Thank you.
So sure. I see from AB, as a city or council has directed us to change to IPM practices in public areas of downtown and schools. There's a significant cost with this change, mostly the cost of education and product. Would this grant fit with those needs? I would imagine, depending on how the reviewer, how the project is written, projects that develop educational materials are very important to the IPM Center.
Yeah, I agree with that. That sounds like a outreach and outreach
grant.
project.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you've already got the information and just need to disseminate it, outreach and implementation would be a very good category to apply under. And the information about the student IPM fellowships can be found on the Western IPM website. There's a link to project proposal RFAs on the website.
Do you want me to show
And
my
they
screen?
are open. Sure.
Jill?
They're open all year long.
So this is the homepage, which is westernipm.org, and you just click on the grants tab. It will bring up a listing of the grants that are currently open, and the fellowship program is right there. Sorry to interrupt, Jill.
No, thank you very much for doing that. There's a question on whether there's a requirement for matching funds. No, there is not. And I don't know that the project would be ranked any differently whether there's matching funds available. I think what would be important if you've got other projects would be to explain very carefully how this project is different or enhances what you're doing in your other projects. It's important not to apply for funds to do the same thing from the Western IPM Center that you're already being funded for under another program. But if this is a piece that adds to that other program, this is a very good fit for that type of project. You're welcome. Anybody else? If you have any trouble accessing the grant site, please let us know. It's pretty straightforward for the most, in my opinion, and I'm not very technologically adept. And I was able to get in pretty easily. You just need to put in your login, and then you get taken to the site, and you have to select the Western IPM grant program and go from there.
Jill, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I think we might be getting close to the end.
I think you're correct.